welcome to another edition of the Last Negroes at Harvard podcast. There were 18 of us in the Harvard College class of 1963. We are all over 82 years old now, and for the last 4 years we've been producing a weekly podcast. Today our guest is Adam Hochchild. He is one of our classmates. He is the author of American Midnight, The Great War, A Violent Peace, and Democracy's Forgotten Crisis. And he has written a Washington Post opinion article titled, America Was at its Trumpiest 100 years ago. Here's how to prevent the worst. And I'm joined by 16 of my Harvard classmates. Let's start with Bill Collins.
Bill Collins, living in Aiken, South Carolina. Harvard 63, joined the Navy, 20 years in the Navy, surface, nuclear power, 5 ships, so on. And I was over there in 3 ships during the Vietnam War in the Tonkin Gulf.
Okay. Richard.
Well, hello, Adam. Berkeley, California, and Cape Cod, half and half.
Okay. Hi, Richie.
Hi, it's good to see you.
Yes.
I don't know what else. You know everything else about me.
Well, you've written some very important books, so.
Not as important as you and not as many as you. I compete with you neither in quality or quantity. But thank you.
Cindy.
Quality, though,
Yes.
you got.
Allison Wardle. Cindy. I graduated in the class of 63, 2 years in the Peace Corps in Turkey, and then I got a master's at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies. Shortly thereafter, I moved to Italy and did various jobs, mostly helping my husband with his businesses. We also have vineyards, and it requires, you wouldn't think so, but lots and lots of bureaucracy that I had to handle. So that's that's it.
Ron.
Newton, Massachusetts. Went to work at WGBH a week after graduation. Been in television and related things ever since, and I'm still doing it, mostly on a volunteer basis.
Okay, Holden.
Live in San Mateo, California, after having been in a bunch of other places, including Chicago and Flint, Michigan. My wife and I have a fundraising consulting firm. We consult with nonprofits.
Okay, David Lillibaugh.
I'm in New York City. I'm a historian of India, although these days I'm trying to write something, but I'm sorely distracted by other things of Israel, Palestine, of Harvard, Columbia, one thing after another. So it's very hard to get back into the 19th century.
Okay, David Allen.
Ron has already pegged me in Concord, Mass.
Okay.
Yes, I had that dalliance in the military, but I've wised up since. I've had a kaleidoscope of a life, business and academics, and now what we're doing here. Your article was startling. Certainly looking forward to hear.
Okay. John Woodford.
Well, hi, here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I've been since 77. Editing and writing have been what I've been doing. And I don't do much of it now because I think when David talks about having things to write, yeah, I have things I'm supposed to write, but I just don't seem to be able to hit the ground running as quickly. Other things to do, distractions.
Okay. Roberta.
There, longtime Bostonian, now living in Oakland, California, and I'm a great admirer of your books, Adam, and have enjoyed a number of the recent courses you gave at Cal's Ali program.
Oh, great. Great.
Good. Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Maury. I'm currently located in Tacoma Park, right outside of DC. Native Californian, class of 63, almost fully retired clinical psychologist, and also very interested in finding out more about my forebears who were enslavers in Charlottesville.
Okay. George Jones.
George Jones, class of 63, currently living in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Like all of us, I am concerned about what's happening in this country, in Palestine, and Ukraine. But I'm also concerned about what's happening in Sudan, where by some estimates, as many as 150,000 people have died. What can we do about that?
Okay. Ann.
Hi, I'm Ann Groves. I'm currently in Oakland, California. Came out to Berkeley for grad school, and here I am. I'm a mostly retired psychotherapist and interested in this topic for so many reasons. One of which is that my grandfather was a country lawyer who had something to do with the defense of Eugene Debs. And my mother describes having a dog when she was a child who was named Debbie after Eugene Debs. So he has a very special place in my heart.
Jerry.
Good morning. Jerry Secundi, live in Pasadena, California. An environmental lawyer, and figured out that it was better to live at 12,000 feet in the Andes Mountain in the Peace Corps than going to Vietnam.
Good move. Doug.
Doug Shapiro, MD, PhD, graduated from Harvard with the rest of you. I've had several different careers, one in internal medicine and one studying the behavior of coral reef fish.
Okay. Jeff Fox.
Oh, hi. Well, you all know me. I don't know why we're all introducing ourselves because I think everybody knows one another by now. But I'm living in Spain. I was a professor of sociology for many years, and now because seeing the parallels that many people have noted, including Adam, between what's going on now and things that were going on in Europe 100 years ago. I'm trying to do sociology through fiction, and now focusing on those critical years in Germany from 1918 on. So,
okay, David Hoffmer.
Living in Philadelphia, been here for quite a while. Roomed to Jerry Secundi in college, and so we've known each other for an extremely long time, and actually we went to Andover together as well. So that was but very pleased to be with this group, and welcome to you.
Okay, Kathy Nelson, are you on?
Yes, I'm on. Sorry, I'm not showing. Okay. I'm an economist, retired from HUD, live in just outside Washington, D.C. Very concerned about our fearful leader, and glad to have read your article, Adam, and look forward to hearing you.
Okay, thank you. And Adam, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and tell us about your article and about what's going on.
Well, thank you, Kent. It's lovely to be with you all. I suspect all of you, like me, are feeling a rare burst of Harvard patriotism in the last day or two because of President Garber's stand. That's not an emotion that comes to me very readily or very frequently, but it sure did this week, and I was delighted to see what he said. You may recall, and it's great to see at least 3 or 4 of you whom I knew in college and have all too rarely seen since then, and to see the rest of you as well. You may remember that about 2.5 years ago, I talked to you and I think showed slides for my book, American Midnight. But since I don't expect you to remember every word of what I said, then let me reprise it a little bit, which is what I did in this piece that Kent referred to that I wrote in the Washington Post, where what I tried to do was to say, well, one way to get some perspective on this current moment we're in is to look at the last time that I think things in this country were this dire, which was the period 1917 to 1921. And let me go over what happened then, which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with. But just to remind you, because in some ways it was worse than things are now, in some ways it was a little bit better than things are now, in that there was not a president who was openly defying court orders, which is what I think makes today's constitutional crisis something different than what we faced for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, 1917 to 21 became a pretty nasty period in American life, as I'm sure you know, triggered by two things. The first was America's entry into the First World War. April 1917, Woodrow Wilson went before Congress, asked it to declare war. And that produced an enormous outpouring of patriotic hysteria. The sort of bottled up feeling that the U.S. ought to be taking part in this greatest war that the world had ever seen. Most people were pretty enthusiastic about. There were more resistors, though. 6 U.S. senators, 50 members of Congress voted against declaring war. And the Wilson administration had no tolerance whatever for dissent on this issue and began a very harsh crackdown. That accelerated in November of that year, 1917, when the second phase of the Russian Revolution happened, bringing the Bolsheviks to power and creating an enormous Red Scare in this country, something that we have seen before and have certainly seen since then. And the combination of hysteria over, patriotic hysteria over the war, desire to crush dissenters on that issue, plus the terror that the Russian Revolution might spread to the United States, brought really unprecedented repression. And it took several forms. One was press censorship on a huge scale. The US government shut down some 75 newspapers and magazines, not by ordering them closed, but just by saying, you cannot send this publication through the US mail. And in the days before the internet, before email and so forth, that was the only way that a national publication could reach its readers. It censored specific issues of 400 or so others, and it was a crippling blow for dissenting journalism of any kind in this country, put many of these publications out of business permanently. The most spectacular example was a magazine called The Masses, which some of you may remember from American history classes in college. It published John Reed, Edna St. Vincent Millay, Walter Lippmann, Sherwood Anderson, many of the best writers and artists and cartoonists of the day. It was very in its mixture of reportage, cartoons, fiction, poetry. It was very much a precursor to the New Yorker, had very good graphics. It was banned from the mail and therefore closed by the US government in August 1917. One of the things that offended the censor was a cartoon of the Liberty Bell crumbling. Ironically, the censorship operation was run, because it involved the rights to mail your publication, was run out of post office headquarters by an extremely right-wing cabinet member, Albert Burleson of Texas, a former congressman, very segregationist. His family had owned slaves when he was born. And his headquarters for this censorship operation are in the building that a century later became the Trump International Hotel. So there was censorship on a huge scale. That was one thing. Then the Espionage Act, which was rushed through Congress soon after the U.S. declared war, and which in amended form is still on the books today, much amended, gave the government the power to essentially lock people up for opposing the war. And there were many Americans, mostly but not entirely on the left, who felt the U.S. should not get involved in a European quarrel, whatever the rights and wrongs of it were. And using that act, that act was on the federal level, but many states passed copycat legislation on the state level, and even some municipalities, including, alas, Berkeley, California, passed copycat legislation. Under all of those laws, federal, state, and municipal, roughly 1,000 Americans went to jail for a year or more, and a much larger number for shorter periods, solely for things that they wrote or said. I don't mean that nobody did anything violent during this period, because there were some anarchist bombings and so on, although those people were never actually caught. But people in jail solely for things they wrote or said. The most famous of them, of course, was Eugene Debs, who, like many of these people, sent to jail for opposing the war, where he was still in jail 2 years after the war ended, November 1920, when he received more than 900,000 votes as a socialist candidate for president, running from his cell in the Atlanta prison. A third aspect of the repression was vigilantes, the equivalent for that time of people like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys today. Very widespread. The largest group, something called the American Protective League, was actually chartered by the U.S. Department of Justice. And these folks were almost all men who were older than military age, but wanted to feel they were taking part in this great war in some way. So they went around seized, roughed up, and sometimes detained for several days, people who looked like they were resisting a draft until their desperate families could get them the proper paperwork and get them released. And if they couldn't get them that, then they were shipped off to the army. They also beat up anti-war demonstrators, and the group actually was officially dissolved by the Justice Department after the First World War ended. But many of its members so much enjoyed doing this kind of vigilante work that they found work as strikebreakers in the great wave of strikes that began in 1919. So these were some of the things that happened in what I think of as the Trumpiest period of American history before Trump. A lot of things that happened that Trump would have liked to have done, and they still do. And it was a period of great repression, and it had a devastating effect on the country. It essentially eliminated the Socialist Party as a political force, because so many socialists went to jail, others were terrified to act. This party that had won 6% of the popular vote in 1912 presidential election never won anything remotely close to that again. It also basically crushed the IWW, the Wobblies, the most militant labor group. And of course, this was the purpose of the repression. It wasn't just about the war. It was about crushing all kinds of groups on the left, and this happened effectively. The political prisoners were still in jail, as I say, long after the war ended. Wilson released a few of them before he left office in March 1921. Warren Harding released more. When he became president, he actually invited Debs to come and visit him on his way home from prison. And Debs told reporters when he left the White House on that occasion, said, "I've run for the White House 5 times, but this is the first time I've ever actually gotten here." However, Harding did not let all prisoners out. That only happened under Calvin Coolidge's reign. And remember, these are people sent to prison solely for things that they wrote or said. So I think it left a very scarred country. It's no accident that there was no significant social legislation of any kind during the 1920s. It's no accident that the Socialist Party remained shriveled up. And it really took the impetus of the Great Depression and the coming of the election of Franklin Roosevelt before we had real movement forward in the United States. So what's similar and what's different about the fix we're in now and the fix the country was in back then? I think there are a couple of differences. One is, and I take some heart from these things. One is that the media of that period, 1917 to 21, was either silenced by censorship, papers shut down, or got on board with the president, with the sort of martial spirit in the air. If you read even the best papers like the New York Times from that period, it is just appalling how they did not question what the government was doing. They gave front page coverage to officials ranting away with complete nonsense, and they praised them on their editorial pages. The daily press was very, very timid. There were rare exceptions, and if the exceptions got too loud, they were shut down or had specific issues that were canceled and not allowed to be distributed. Today, we do have this fire hose of nonsense from Fox News and other things on the right, but we still do have a lot of the media that is functioning and is doing investigative stories. In fact, does many more investigative stories than were done in this terrible period 100 years ago. So I strongly take heart from that. That's one difference. I think another difference is that in that Red Scare period, 1917 to 21, most of the public was on board with the martial spirit. There were brave dissenters, most of the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party actually split over this issue, but about 2/3 of the party remained against the war and very distressed about the repression of people. But in general, the public was happy to go along with the flag waving, the dissent. There were the suppression of dissent. There were many exceptions, but the general martial spirit really permeated the country. And extraordinary things took place. In the early months, there was tremendous feeling directed against anything German, and there were bonfires of German language books all over the country. You can see photographs of this on the internet. Dozens of them. High schools, colleges stopped teaching German and piled their books in bonfires and set them on fire. They didn't even wait for vigilantes or the government to tell them, you can't teach this language. So there was a kind of martial spirit that pervaded far too much of the country, which I don't think we have today. We shouldn't forget that half the people in this country did not vote for Donald Trump. So those are, I think, some of the similarities and some of the differences between where things are today and where things were a little over 100 years ago. I think I mentioned one other difference as well, which is that I really do feel that today most Americans have, and opinion polling shows this, I think, have a greater respect for the Bill of Rights than people did 100 years ago. This draconian law, the Espionage Act, was upheld unanimously by the Supreme Court in early 1919. It came again before the court again in late 1919, and a very brave man, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., changed his mind and persuaded his colleague Louis Brandeis to do the same. And it was upheld again by the Supreme Court only by a 7-2 vote. I think draconian legislation coming before the Supreme Court today, we know it would get there would be at least 3 votes against it, and maybe 4 if Chief Justice Roberts was trying to do his usual straddle. But I'll leave that to the lawyers among you to pronounce on. Anyway, so those were some of the differences between today and this period 100 years ago. I think we mustn't lose sight of the fact that half the people in this country did not vote for Trump. I'm also optimistic that as the effects of what he's doing spread, you can't lop off 1/4 of the staff of the Social Security Administration and not have people fail to get their Social Security checks. There are going to be repercussions from that. There are going to be people, not getting their veterans benefits because of the cuts in the VA. There are going to be other things like that that will affect people. And, there's already pushback. The Republican Party told its members of Congress, don't do town halls in your home districts for the moment. And indeed, they haven't. And some Democrats have been going to those districts and holding town halls, which I think is a very interesting tactic. I'm also encouraged that so many people turned out for the April 5th demonstrations. I'm sure some of you took part in these. And if you look online, you'll see pictures of people, large crowds of demonstrators, not just in the predictable places like Berkeley in New York and Boston, but in Missoula, Montana, Phoenix, Arizona, Asheville, North Carolina, Salt Lake City, Utah, an enormous crowd. Not the places that you would expect. So I think that there is a sense of opposition building. But I don't need to tell you all of the terrible things that are coming down the pipe that require ever more of that opposition. I'm encouraged by Harvard's defiance. I'm encouraged by the many law firms that have signed a statement, several hundred of them now, I think, saying we will not do what those big 5 law firms that capitulated did. I'm encouraged by the Tesla boycott and the plunge in the price of Tesla's stock. We need to think of more things like this. We need to participate in more things like this. Anyway, that's what I've been thinking about. I think I've talked enough, and I should stop. And I'd love to hear what some of you have to say. And I hope you give me some ideas, because I have to give a talk on this on Friday to a student group at University of California, Irvine, and I'm really looking for positive, encouraging things to say. So be prepared to have anything you tell me along those lines plagiarized.
Call it research.
Jerry. All right. Adam, I read your book, American Midnight. Brilliant, and one of the most depressing and fearsome books I've ever read in my life. It just really disturbed me, no question. I had no idea that happened, I guess, nearly 100 years ago at this point in time. One of the rumors that's going around right now is that Trump may declare martial law. What do you think of the chances of that happening? And what do you think the reaction would be?
Good question. One or two of you are lawyers, I think, who probably know more about this than I do. I don't know what is martial law the same thing as declaring a state of emergency? He has declared a state of emergency along the border. where, of course, ironically, there are very few people trying to come across the border. It's really dropped off in the months before he was elected. I certainly think he'll try anything. What the legal meaning of martial law or state of emergency is, I would rather yield to anybody here who's a lawyer who can say more about that.
Well, I must admit, I'm a
Is one
lawyer,
of you a lawyer?
I don't know the basis that he would use. He'll probably come up with some ancient law justifying it, but any of the other lawyers have an idea?
Not a lawyer, but in South Korea, when the leader tried that, they had enough of a mass democratic public response to knock him out of office. Unfortunately, I think we don't have as hearty a group of organizations that can come together and pull something like that off, but we ought to.
In South Korea, they actually had to storm the parliament, which had been blockaded by military, and they overcame the military. It's a startling story.
Mm-hmm.
David, Annabelle. Just coming back to the 1917-21 period, it occurs to me, and this is my special interest, that that's the period in India when Gandhi arose and led a movement against something called the Rowlatt Acts, which were repressive acts, almost exactly and worse than the ones that Adam describes in the article, with preventive detention, heavy censorship of the press, and imprisonment of people. And it's started during the war. There was considerable Indian participation in Europe and in what was then called Mesopotamia during World War I. And but there was also considerable Indian opposition to the war, particularly among Muslims. And all of that was used to repress the whole movement of nationalism. And this is Gandhi arose to power on a national basis, to prominence, I should say, first of all, resisting these repressive laws. So this raises the question of the international context, both in the past and the present, the significance of the war, the significance of the Russian Revolution, and how people in power responded to it.
Okay. George.
Adam, in your article, you mentioned a name that I have for some time thought was the logical person to be the leader of the loyal opposition, and that's Barack Obama. Do you have any idea why he has not been more engaged than he has been, and what we might do to get him to be more so?
I don't. I mean, he's somebody who, is so many ways head and shoulders above other politicians at the national level in this country. I don't need to tell you folks that, I'm sure. I don't know why he's been so silent. He's said a few things in the last couple of days. I think he was grateful that George W. Bush remained silent after Obama became president. But I don't think Trump in any way deserves the same kind of favor. If any of you have any connections to him, make use of them, light a fire under him, because, that voice of his and Michelle's are so powerful. I would love to hear them speak out more.
Richard.
Thanks. With regard to your question about martial law, in effect, we have martial law now. The legal issue is doesn't matter because he's given every indication and action that he's going to ignore the courts. He's ignored Congress. Congressional authority has been ignored. So we no longer have a functioning constitution. And he also has installed political cronies in charge of the army as long as they're white males. So I don't think there's much difference between what martial law would look like and what is going on now. He announced the other day that this business of picking up people without due process and shipping them to El Salvador can be extended to citizens as well. So I think, and I do recognize your pleasure about the growing opposition to him. But he also said in the campaign, and we all dismissed it, he said, vote for me now and you won't ever have to vote again. And he said a lot of ridiculous things that we didn't take seriously, and then he's done them. And I think we ought to take seriously this one as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Liz, I think you're muted. Go
Sorry.
ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I was very glad that you talked about the encouraging things, which I think we're all looking at. I went to one of the Tesla demonstrations. I went downtown on April 5th, et cetera. I'd be interested in what your worst fears are, because I think in this group, we pretty well know what everybody else's worst fears are. So you can add to that context. The other thing is that because I'm a product of my generation, I worry about bombs. I worry about nukes, and this has not seemed to be part of anybody's conversation in the press or anywhere else. But we still know. If you think of the Union of Concerned Scientists, whoever they are, who have the clock and how close it is to midnight. So I'd be interested both in your take on nukes and Trump. And also fears and Trump.
Do you want me to respond now, or there's someone else has his hand up here?
I'd like you to respond.
Okay. You're right to worry about nukes. I mean, anybody who is this unstable and this given to fits of rage, who has thousands of nuclear weapons at his disposal, is really dangerous. And they are right to have the hands of that clock very close to midnight. It's a little hard to predict who might get nuked. Maybe Iran, if they don't knuckle under and agree to what he wants. Probably not China, because he knows they have nukes that they could send back at us. But it is tremendously scary. And God only knows what the mentality is of this new guy who's going to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The existing hierarchy of the military seems to be mostly made up of people who do appreciate the danger of these terrible weapons that we have so many of. As Trump placed his own loyalists in positions of immense power, it does become more dangerous. I don't have anything reassuring to say on that score. Other fears I have are that I think the biggest one is that he will find some excuse to cancel, disrupt, postpone the 2026 elections. Because any more congressional elections that take place or any state elections like the one for the justice on the Supreme Court in Wisconsin between now and then are likely to go against him, as did the election in Wisconsin, and as the Republican Party lost a lot of ground in those two vacant congressional seats in Florida. Even though they won them, they lost 10 or 15% in each case. And then he canceled the appointment of Louis Stefanik to be ambassador to the UN because they were scared of looking an election that would not look well for them to replace her in New York. So I think he's scared of elections and will do anything possible to cancel or postpone the ones in 2026 coming up. One thing that does give me some hope, has to be balanced against these other things, is that there's a difference between a competent authoritarian and an incompetent authoritarian. And I think Trump is in many ways wildly incompetent. A competent authoritarian would not have made such a long laundry list of demands at Harvard, that provoked Harvard's resistance. Somebody like Orban in Hungary, who has completely taken over the universities in that country, didn't do it with an all-out assault. It was a little nibble at a time, making this demand. Yes, we can give in to that. Making another demand. Yeah, okay, we can give in to that. Don't interrupt our funding. That's the way somebody who's competent does it, I think. Trump has a very short attention span. This helps too. But all of those things are dangerous, but make it more dangerous when it comes to, wielding nuclear weapons. So his incompetence, erraticness, short attention span may help us with some things, but they do make it more dangerous in other ways.
Thank you.
David.
So you were looking for positive possibilities for the talk you're about to give. I think you just come on one of the strongest ones, that he really is incompetent and he's bringing extreme resistance against him. At the same time, looking to Richard's description, which I more or less subscribe to, that violence just hovers in the background right now. We already saw the Pennsylvania governor's house firebomb. Now, that was by somebody who was clearly unbalanced, not necessarily an arm of what's going on with Trump, but it was because he opposes basically what the Democrats say. We see a first outcropping. I hope I don't shock people by saying I'm glad I fired expert with a 45 automatic at OCS, and I still have it. And frankly, if called to it, let's hope we don't go there. If I could get to something that builds on your descriptions. I look at the story around the First World War, and of course, what we hope we get from that is, so we got out of that. Are there some pointers about that could tell us how we get out of this? I'm sure you've thought about it. I have no doubt you've thought about it. What troubles me is that the context for that was a bad war that we needed to support. And what's going on right now is we've declared war on the rest of the world economically. And very, very seriously, it's almost the reverse situation. And that offers less hope for lessons from that period, although I'm most intrigued about your thoughts here. But if I finish on one thing, because I see so many colleagues behind me here, it spurred a thought. You pointed out that the 20s were a period where I don't have the right phrase in my mind, but we didn't see good stuff happening. Let me put it that way. And it occurred to me, could that have been significantly what precipitated the explosion, quote unquote, of 29 and the descent into the Depression? Did the story that you lay out for us about the 20s, did that cause there, and in some respects offer some other hope for us? Sorry for too much. Love to hear.
don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of disagreement about the actual causes of the depression, but uh, I don't think the crushing of the left in the United States was one of them. Partly because the left in this country was never really as strong as it was in many parts of Europe. Um, it's true that if we'd been able to construct more of a social safety net in the 1920s and had not been, 30 or 40 years behind European countries in coming up with things like Social Security, and still being far behind them in terms of medical insurance, national medical insurance, the toll of the depression would have been less. But I do feel, from what I know about it, that its underlying causes were economic and sort of beyond the political atmosphere of the day, since it did happen really all over the world at that time.
Roberta.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to the my own fears as well as others here today about the declaring of martial law and the postponing of the elections. And one of the things I've been thinking about is the resistance has remained impressively nonviolent. But I worry that should it get more violent because of maybe the more extreme things that Trump will do, that he would love that. Because if the opposition gets violent, that gives him permission to declare martial law and perhaps as a result of that to postpone the elections. So I do worry about us remaining nonviolent and he not doing things to provoke it.
Worry about that too, and about provocateurs being infiltrated into these demonstrations, and people throw rocks through windows of stores and so on. And, well, who was the person who threw the rock? We have to be really on guard for stuff like
that. Yeah, Alden. Alden.
Hello. Is Alden muted?
No, he's not muted.
Sorry. I'm John. Sorry your letter didn't make it to the New York Times, but there were a couple of other letters similar that did make it. So this is, I'm not a lawyer and my wife's not a lawyer, but she came up with the idea that if the Harvard thing goes to the Supreme Court, all those Harvard law graduates may have to recuse themselves, which means that Roberts, Jackson, Kagan, and Gorsuch would recuse themselves, leaving Sotomayor, Alito, Thomas, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, which would be a 4-1 decision against Harvard.
Good thinking on your wife's part.
That's good, yeah. Ronnie Blau.
Yeah, following up on what others have talked about will there be an election next year, and kind of looking from another angle at what Roberta just said, if he doesn't declare martial law, but he says, you know what, there's so much corruption and the voting machines are rigged and everything like that, we're going to postpone the election next year. That's going to be something that affects basically all of us. The other things are segmented. What he's done with USAID, as Atul Gawande says, hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. But that's, not mostly in the United States. If you're not buying a car, you may not suffer as much from tariffs, and some people can afford it. But postponing or nullifying an election affects basically all of us. And I think that could bring out a lot of people into the streets. So he doesn't have to declare martial law before that. But I could think that he would declare martial law after that. And that's going to be a really dangerous time, and particularly if he gets the military on his side. So I wonder about your reactions to that scenario.
can he take over the military that completely in the next 2 years? I rather doubt it, even if he's got a general who loves him, who's now the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. One of the things, and a number of you have spent time in the military, as I did too, very briefly, 60 plus years ago. You could be court-martialed if you disobey a lawful order. But what constitutes a lawful order? And I suspect a lot of higher officers with conscience would say, following an order to cancel constitutionally mandated election is not a lawful order. It's very hard to predict how the military would behave on something like this, but I have some optimism in that somehow, for all its faults, the idea of nonpartisanship is pretty deeply embedded in the U.S. military. General George Marshall, as a matter of principle, did not vote and declared that he did not vote because he said the military ought to be at the service of the civilian government. We have not yet anyway, in this country, had the threat of military coups, something which exists in so many countries around the globe. I also think, so people would question, does the president have the authority to cancel an election? Has that ever been done? I don't think it's ever been done. Elections take place in wartime in the United States. I believe elections took place in the northern states during the Civil War without interruption. And of course, elections are by and large run by the states. And actually, that brings me to another point that I would take considerable encouragement in a long-range way from, which is that we are a country with fairly powerful state governments. California, where I live and where several of you live, is going its own way on many issues from a very different direction than Trump is. We generate 64% of our electricity in California from renewable sources, and that percentage goes up every year. And the state government is totally behind that effort. Governor Pritzker of Illinois denounced Trump, compared him to Hitler, and did another thing which I quite like, made fun of him by renaming Lake Michigan Lake Illinois, a sort of nod to Trump's renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. So we do have strong state governments which have considerable powers. One of them is running elections. One of the first things that Hitler did after coming to power in Germany was to dissolve all state legislatures. Trump does not have the power to do that. And the state governments are the people who run the elections. So I think he's going to run into some thorny problems if he tries to cancel the elections, although he may well try to do it. Whether under a state of emergency, martial law, or something like that, we can't tell. We have to be prepared for that.
Nick.
Hello. I'm thinking of Colonel House and Stephen Miller. I wonder if there's any comparison there. Do you have any ideas of a strategy to shine a spotlight on our current Colonel House?
It's a fascinating comparison. As I'm sure you all know, Colonel House was Woodrow Wilson's top advisor until they had a falling out during the peace conference at Versailles. And he was whispering in Wilson's ear the whole time. He was not a sort of public figure talking to the media the way Stephen Miller is, but he was very close to Wilson. served as Wilson's confidential envoy to various countries in Europe. Um, Stephen Miller is playing that role in a different way. I agree that he's sort of in some ways, the most sinister person in the administration, in this ferocious hatred of immigrants, probably hatred of anybody who isn't white, that he has. God knows where it all comes from. He's got Holocaust survivors in his family. His uncle has disowned him. There's a fascinating biography to be written there, I think. But people like that scare me because I think they are more competent than Trump is. To some extent, he's surrounded himself with equally incompetent people, like Hegsteth at the Defense Department, for example. A complete nincompoop who doesn't know how to do anything other than look good on TV. But Stephen Miller scares me because he appears to be competent and strategic in the way that many of the people around Trump are not. So I hope in a way he picks more Hegsteths than he does Stephen Miller to surround himself with.
Bill, I think you muted.
Yeah, I know. I just unmuted myself. A couple of things. First of all, I served 20 years and I'm retired military. And we all take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's the first part of the oath. The second part is to obey the lawful orders of the president and the officers appointed over us. I hope, I don't know this, I hope that the majority, at least a great number of military officers and military people generally, would take that oath seriously. I hope. I know when in Watergate, I was on a shore duty assignment at the time, and I was listening to the news very carefully, and I asked myself what I would do if Nixon ordered the military to invest the Congress, seize the Congress. And I concluded I would have to stand up and say that is an unlawful order. I cannot do that. How many others would stand up? I don't know. But there's a gleam of hope there, at least.
Yeah.
Are you still in touch with any of your military colleagues?
I am. We don't really talk about politics, which has been a military tradition. But I think there are some number who are looking at the current situation with great anxiety, shall I say. I think there are some number of those. The other thing I'd mentioned, I heard Alexandria Cortez give a speech and a rally in Idaho I don't know when it was exactly. And she had a big crowd cheering, and she was very fiery and very direct. And I say, and she's kind of going around with Bernie Sanders. Is she Bernie Sanders' successor?
I hope so.
And,
I hope so.
She was, I wasn't sure she was born in the United States. I looked that up. She was born in the Bronx. So she can't serve as president.
Let's hope that we all live long enough to be able to vote for her.
Yeah, no kidding.
Here.
Liz.
Hi. I was greatly taken when you were talking about authoritarian leaders being competent or incompetent. And it led me not to Stephen Miller, who now I'm going to pay way much more attention to as a result of what you're talking about. But it led me to Elon Musk. Because my question is Trump actually running the show here? In my field, in the mental health field, we are almost unanimous in feeling that you can shoot at any dartboard of diagnoses and whatever you shoot at will be correct. And the other is that he's really suffering cognitive decline. That this is not a man in full charge of himself. So I would be very interested in your thoughts about, is he the puppet? I guess that would be a good way of putting it.
Well, in a way, Musk may be something of a blessing for us because he is not popular. If you look, for example, at that Wisconsin Supreme Court vote,
Oh, yeah.
the woman who won there won by a 10% margin in a state that Trump had won just several months before in the general election. She won, even though, thanks to Musk, there was much more money against her than money backing her. And she won not by running against her opponent, but by running against Musk and by saying, my opponent in this election is Elon Musk. And it was very effective. And I think whatever Elon Musk's tech smarts are, he is not smart about how he presents himself, and he's not smart about public relations, and he is making himself unpopular. I was just teaching a class yesterday, and a student of mine had come back from doing some research in Tennessee, Appalachian Tennessee, which is very much Trump country. And we were all questioning her, what do people there think about Trump and so on. She said, well, they still love Trump, but they really hate Elon Musk. So in a way, he may be sort of a gift to us, despite the chainsaw that he is taking to so many different parts of the government, some of them with real tragic effects. Because even if, we're able to get back the presidency 3.5 years from now and so on, it's going to take years to rebuild all this stuff that's been destroyed.
I had a quick question for, I guess, David Lilival and you, Adam. Why did, or how did Columbia fold, whereas Harvard did not? Any sense of that? What happened?
Dave, you're the expert there.
Well, while he's doing that, I want to point out that Harvard did accept and has not got rid of the standard of defining anti-Semitism that Holocaust Center created, and it's an extremely reactionary, ethnocentric definition, ethno-nationalist definition of anti-Semitism that covers political speech, and Harvard still subscribes to it. So we're not out of the woods yet. We made a step, but we haven't, there's more to go because that thing should not stand. It's got to be gotten rid of.
John is right about that. About Columbia, there is something of an advantage in the governance of Harvard. We all have the opportunity to vote for the overseers. That election came through. And there are groups that, like the diversity group that put through slates. At Columbia, the trustees are entirely outside the academic world. They are corporate people. They are, I don't think there is a single academic in the board of trustees. And the power of the faculty is much less at Columbia than it is at Harvard. That's my sense of it. So Columbia has, its current acting president comes out of the board of trustees, doesn't come out of the university in any way. There was a very good article in The Guardian last week about that. And Harvard does have a few mechanisms of governance which were deliberately attacked in that letter from the former president of the Wrestling Federation to Harvard, which demanded the ending of any of that more democratic form of governance in the university. That's something of a difference.
I would actually take a sort of different view because I think the real government at Harvard, of course, is not the Board of Overseers, but the corporation, whom we as alumni or anybody else get to vote for. It is, I believe, completely self-perpetuating. However, they are mostly very rich people something we would normally think is not a good thing to put the university in such hands. But in this case, I rather suspect that President Garber checked very carefully with each one of them and said, will you back me on this, before he made his strong statement. And it worked to our advantage. I don't think there is a Republican among them. People have told me this.
And Penny Pritzker is the wife, the sister of the governor of Illinois, right?
Yeah. So
we have the war Dems are in there.
This may be one time when it's good to have some billionaires on one side. But I think you're right, John, to highlight, the mistake they did make of adopting that very unfortunate definition of anti-Semitism. So they made a step down the wrong road before they declared we're not going to go any further. I think here in Berkeley, it looks as if the chancellor of the Berkeley campus is going to take exactly the same stand. He's been saying, he's not formally done so, but in a series of meetings he's had with faculty and staff groups and so on the campus, he's been talking very much in the same terms as the Harvard chancellor did. Just made an announcement about appointing a new vice chancellor for diversity, equity, and inclusion, as if to say, all right, I'm sticking it to you, Trump. So I'm optimistic that Berkeley will come through, and I think many other campuses as well. The president of Wesleyan has been terrific. Some of you may have seen the op-ed he did in the New York Times a few days ago. It's a little easier for him because they don't have big federal research grants there that can be cut off. But Princeton apparently has also been quite good. So I'm hopeful that a lot of other universities will follow their lead.
Adam, did you also see that Harvard was able to secure a $750 million loan from Wall Street?
Yes, that was in the news this morning. Yeah. Well, it's a good thing to do, to borrow some money if you're afraid your next chunk of cash is not going to come in.
It's also relevant that Harvard's a lot richer than any of the other universities, including Columbia, and they have more of a cushion, perhaps, than the other universities.
Well, Adam, thank you so much. It's been really great. We've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes or so. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
Thanks a lot.
It's been a pleasure being with you all. I've scribbled some notes here for points to steal for the talk I have to give later this week. And good luck to you. And let's hope we'll see some good news coming down the pike at some point in the coming months.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Take care.
That was Adam Hochchild talking about his Washington Post article, America was at its Trumpiest 100 years ago. Here's how to prevent the worst. And that's it for this edition of the Last Negroes at Harvard podcast. We will talk to you again next week.